How does a movie lose more money than most people could spend in a lifetime? Not by accident. Behind Hollywood's biggest box office disasters were warning signs, inflated egos, impossible budgets, and studios betting hundreds of millions on films audiences simply rejected. Today, we're counting down the 15 most expensive failures in movie history. The flops that didn't just lose money, but damaged careers, killed franchises, and sent panic through Hollywood boardrooms.
Number 17. Justice League, 2017.
This was supposed to be DC's grand superhero coronation, but it arrived looking more like a studio emergency. Justice League had Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, Aquaman, Cyborg, and the kind of brand power most studios dream about. But behind the scenes, the movie was hit by tragedy, director changes, reshoots, tonal confusion, and a budget that kept swelling. Instead of feeling like the heroic answer to Marvel's Avengers, it felt rushed, uneven, and strangely hollow. The box office was big in ordinary terms, but nowhere near enough for a film carrying this much cost and expectation. Justice League did not just disappoint financially. It damaged trust in DC's entire cinematic plan.
Number 16. Dark Phoenix, 2019.
Dark Phoenix was meant to give the X-Men saga one final burst of cosmic tragedy, but instead it felt like a franchise quietly running out of oxygen. The story had one of the most famous arcs in X-Men history, Jean Grey losing control of terrifying power. Yet the movie arrived with little excitement, heavy franchise fatigue, and the shadow of Disney's takeover of Fox hanging over it. Audiences could sense that this version of the X-Men was ending, not evolving. The marketing felt muted, the reviews were brutal, and the box office collapsed fast. Dark Phoenix did not just lose money. It turned a legendary superhero storyline into a flat farewell.
Number 15. Heaven's Gate, 1980.
This was the movie that turned artistic freedom into a Hollywood warning label. Heaven's Gate was supposed to be a grand, serious Western from Michael Cimino, the Oscar-winning director of The Deer Hunter. Instead, it became a symbol of unchecked ambition. The production dragged on, the budget exploded, sets were rebuilt obsessively, and stories of perfectionism began to sound like studio nightmares. When the film finally reached audiences, the reaction was brutal. Critics attacked it, viewers stayed away, and United Artists was left carrying a financial wound that Hollywood never forgot. The actual loss looks smaller beside modern superhero disasters, but its impact was enormous. Heaven's Gate did not just fail at the box office. It scared studios away from giving directors unlimited power.
Number 14. The Adventures of Pluto Nash, 2002.
Some flops crashed loudly. Pluto Nash barely made a sound before disappearing into pure Hollywood embarrassment. Eddie Murphy was still one of the most recognizable comedy stars in the world, the kind of name studios believed could sell almost anything. But this futuristic sci-fi comedy became a disaster almost from the moment it reached theaters. The movie had a massive budget, expensive sets, strange lunar world building, casino gangsters, robot sidekicks, and a concept that should have been wild enough to feel fun. Instead, it landed with almost no excitement. Audiences ignored it, critics mocked it, and the box office numbers were brutal. Against a reported cost near $100 million, the film earned only a tiny fraction back in theaters, turning a star-driven comedy into one of the most painful standalone bombs of its era. The worst part was not just the money lost, it was the lesson behind it. Pluto Nash proved that even a major star cannot rescue a movie when the idea feels confused, the marketing feels weak, and the audience decides the joke is on the studio.
Number 13. Titan AE, 2000.
This was not just an animated flop. It was a studio's last distress signal before the lights went out. Titan AE arrived with huge ambition, trying to be a darker, bigger, more adult-minded animated space adventure at a time when the industry was rapidly shifting toward computer animation. Fox wanted a serious sci-fi epic with alien planets, massive explosions, heroic survival, deep space danger, and a soundtrack aimed at younger viewers. But the movie had one fatal problem: identity. Was it made for kids, teenagers, animation fans, sci-fi adults, or everyone at once? The marketing never truly answered that question, and confused audiences usually stay home. The film looked expensive, moved fast, and had real imagination, but it struggled to become a must-see event. At the box office, it earned only a fraction of what it needed, and the failure hit hard. Soon after, Fox Animation Studios effectively collapsed, making Titan AE feel like the end of an era. Later viewers found things to admire, but history remembers the brutal truth. It tried to build an animated future and became a funeral for one.
Number 12. Monster Trucks, 2017.
Paramount knew this wreck was expensive before audiences even bought a ticket. Monster Trucks sounded like the kind of strange family adventure that might have worked as a smaller, goofy kids' movie. A lonely teenager, a hidden creature, and a truck powered by a living monster. But Hollywood did not treat it like a modest experiment. It treated it like a major studio event, and that is where the danger began. Before the film even reached theaters, Paramount had already taken a massive write-down, which is basically a studio admitting, "We know this probably will not recover." That made Monster Trucks infamous before it had a fair chance to find an audience. The concept was too bizarre for older viewers, too expensive for its target audience, and too hard to advertise without looking ridiculous. Even with polished effects, harmless family energy, and a creature designed to be lovable, the damage was already done. Monster Trucks did not fail because it was offensive or controversial. It failed because Hollywood spent blockbuster money on an idea that felt like a toy commercial no one had asked for.
Number 11. Mars Needs Moms, 2011.
This was the kind of flop that made Hollywood question whether expensive animation technology was moving forward or walking straight into a wall. Mars Needs Moms had Disney money, sci-fi spectacle, emotional family themes, and motion capture animation that was supposed to feel advanced and futuristic. On paper, the story had a simple hook. A boy takes his mother for granted, aliens kidnap her, and he must travel to Mars to save her before it is too late. That should have been a strange but heartfelt adventure about guilt, love, and growing up. But the problem appeared almost immediately. The animation sat in that uncomfortable middle space where the characters looked human enough to recognize, but not warm enough to love. Instead of charming families, the visuals made many viewers feel distant. Kids did not treat it like a must-see adventure, parents were not pulled in by the emotional pitch, and the marketing never made Mars feel magical or urgent. With a huge budget behind it, the weak box office became brutal fast. Mars Needs Moms did not simply lose money for Disney. It became a public warning that technology alone cannot create emotion. A movie can have planets, aliens, action, and studio power, but if the audience does not feel anything, the most expensive animation in the world becomes cold, empty machinery.
Number 10. Cutthroat Island, 1995. Before Pirates of the Caribbean made pirate movies feel exciting again, Cutthroat Island nearly buried the entire genre at sea. This was supposed to be a grand, old-fashioned swashbuckling adventure, packed with ships, sword fights, cannon fire, explosions, treasure maps, betrayal, romance, and massive Hollywood spectacle. The ambition was obvious in every frame. But behind the scenes, the film became a financial storm. The budget climbed, production problems mounted, marketing struggled, and the movie arrived at a time when audiences were not exactly begging studios for expensive pirate epics. That timing was deadly. When Cutthroat Island finally hit theaters, people simply did not show up in the numbers needed to rescue it. The box office collapse was so severe that it became one of the most infamous bombs of the 1990s. Even worse, its failure helped push Carolco Pictures, once a major studio behind hits like Terminator 2 and Total Recall, toward financial ruin. That is what makes this disaster so fascinating. Cutthroat Island did not look small. It had scale, action, production value, and the confidence of a studio swinging for buried treasure. But Hollywood learned a harsh lesson. Spectacle without demand is dangerous. The movie wanted to sail into blockbuster history. Instead, it became a financial shipwreck that warned studios to stay away from pirates for years. Number 9. The Lone Ranger, 2013.
Disney did not just make a Western here. It tried to manufacture a blockbuster from a brand many younger viewers barely knew. The Lone Ranger had all the ingredients Hollywood usually trusts when it wants a summer event. Johnny Depp, giant action scenes, train crashes, desert spectacle, heavy marketing, and the expensive confidence of a studio chasing another Pirates of the Caribbean miracle. But the warning signs were already glowing red. Westerns are difficult to sell globally, the budget had climbed to superhero levels, and the movie's tone felt strangely uncertain. Was it a buddy comedy, a nostalgic adventure, a dark origin story, a family blockbuster? The audience never fully understood what kind of ride they were being offered, and that confusion became very expensive. Critics were harsh, the opening was underwhelming, and the film quickly became a symbol of franchise arrogance. Disney seemed to believe that a famous old title plus a major star could automatically create demand. But younger audiences had little emotional attachment to the character, while older viewers were not convinced this loud, oversized version honored the legend. The result was a movie too costly to survive ordinary disappointment. The Lone Ranger proved that Hollywood cannot simply dig up a classic name, cover it in explosions, and expect the crowd to salute. Sometimes a studio thinks it is reviving an icon. In reality, it is spending hundreds of millions to discover that nostalgia has an expiration date.
Number 8. King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, 2017.
This was not a movie trying to tell a legend. It was a movie trying to launch an empire before earning one. Warner Brothers looked at King Arthur and did not just see a medieval hero. It saw franchise potential, sequels, mythology, massive battles, dark fantasy, magical swords, ancient power, and perhaps an entire cinematic universe built from one of the oldest legends in Western storytelling. But audiences saw something far less convincing. The film mixed Guy Ritchie's fast-cut street crime energy with medieval fantasy, creating a version of Arthur's world that felt muscular, flashy, and aggressively modern. Some viewers enjoyed the swagger, but many found it exhausting, uneven, and strangely disconnected from the emotional weight of the myth. The bigger problem was the cost. This was not a modest fantasy experiment that could quietly find its audience. It was an expensive studio gamble that needed worldwide enthusiasm just to stay alive. Instead, it opened weakly, faded quickly, and turned a legendary character into a financial warning sign. The failure hurt because King Arthur should have been one of the safest names in mythic adventure. But Hollywood mistook familiarity for excitement and scale for storytelling. King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, did not fail because people had forgotten the legend. It failed because the movie felt like it was selling 5 sequels, a universe, and a brand strategy before audiences had even asked for the first chapter.
Number 7. Battleship, 2012. This was Hollywood looking at a board game and somehow seeing a $200 million alien invasion. Battleship is one of those studio decisions that almost sounds like a joke after the fact. Universal took a simple guessing game, added giant naval warfare, alien machines, global destruction, massive visual effects, military hero speeches, and even Rihanna in a major supporting role, then tried to sell it as the next loud summer spectacle. The problem was not that the movie lacked scale. If anything, it had too much scale for an idea with almost no emotional foundation. Audiences could understand robots, superheroes, dinosaurs, spies, and disaster films because those concepts already carried built-in drama. But a blockbuster inspired by Battleship felt like a marketing department daring people to laugh before the first trailer even ended. The film performed better overseas than in North America, but
but the cost was so enormous that international box office could not fully rescue it. What made the failure sting was the confidence behind it. This was not a small experiment that got out of control. It was a massive studio attempt to prove that any recognizable brand could become a franchise if enough explosions were attached. Battleship became a warning that name recognition is not the same as audience desire. Hollywood thought familiarity would float the movie, but familiarity without passion is dead weight. In the end, this was not just a film that sank. It was a corporate strategy going down with the ship.
Number 6. Mortal Engines, 2018. This was the franchise starter that arrived already feeling like a finale no one had asked for. Mortal Engines had one of the wildest concepts in modern blockbuster cinema. Giant, moving cities roaming a ruined Earth, swallowing smaller towns, powered by steampunk machinery, survival politics, class conflict, and post-apocalyptic spectacle. On paper, it sounded visually unforgettable. With Peter Jackson's name attached as producer and co-writer, Universal clearly hoped this would become a new fantasy universe with the same kind of scale that once made Middle-earth feel unstoppable. But the movie entered theaters in a brutal position. The young adult dystopian craze had already cooled, audiences had moved on from many failed post-apocalyptic franchise attempts, and the marketing struggled to explain why anyone should emotionally care about cities on wheels chasing each other across wastelands. The trailers showed size, noise, machinery, and destruction, but they did not create the one thing every blockbuster needs: urgency. The visuals were expensive, the world building was massive, and the design was imaginative, but the emotional hook never became strong enough. Instead of feeling like the beginning of a grand saga, it felt like a giant machine built before anyone checked whether there was fuel. The box office collapsed fast, and the planned franchise vanished almost instantly. Mortal Engines is one of the clearest examples of Hollywood building the world first and the audience connection second. It had imagination, scale, and ambition. But without characters viewers loved, stakes they felt, or real cultural demand, even a city-sized movie can run out of road. Number 5. The 13th Warrior, 1999.
Some disasters do not explode in public right away. They bleed money quietly, disappear into confusion, and then become legendary for all the wrong reasons. The 13th Warrior began as a serious, muscular adventure based on Michael Crichton's work, mixing Viking mythology, historical grit, survival horror, and monster movie atmosphere. Antonio Banderas starred as an outsider drawn into a brutal northern world where a band of warriors faced an enemy that seemed almost supernatural. That premise had real potential. It had swords, darkness, danger, culture clash, and the kind of violent mystery that could have made it a cult hit from the beginning. But behind the scenes, the film became trapped in expensive trouble. Delays, reshoots, creative disagreements, and a reported budget climb turned a gritty historical thriller into a financial burden too heavy to carry. By the time it reached theaters, audiences did not treat it like a major event. The marketing could not turn it into a must-see spectacle, critics were mixed, and the box office never came close to supporting the cost. Over time, some viewers defended it as underrated, atmospheric, and better than its reputation. But financially, that late respect could not heal the wound. The 13th Warrior became one of Hollywood's great cautionary tales, a dark, interesting adventure crushed by production chaos and runaway spending. It was not simply a movie that underperformed. It proved that even a strong premise can become fatal when the budget grows bigger than the audience waiting for it.
Number 4. The Flash, 2023.
This was supposed to reset a superhero universe. Instead, it became one of the loudest warning sirens in comic book movie history. The Flash arrived carrying the weight of an entire franchise on its back. Warner Brothers did not present it as just another DC movie. It was sold as a major turning point, a multiverse event, a nostalgic return, and a bridge to whatever the studio planned next. That was a dangerous amount of pressure for one film, especially one already surrounded by chaos. Behind the spectacle were years of delays, leadership changes, public controversy, expensive reshoots, shifting studio strategies, and a superhero brand that had already lost a lot of audience trust. The movie brought back Michael Keaton's Batman, leaned hard into nostalgia, and promised timeline-shattering consequences. But by the time audiences finally saw it, excitement had cooled into skepticism. The opening was weaker than expected, the box office dropped fast, and the huge budget turned disappointment into disaster. The painful part is that The Flash was built to feel important, but many viewers treated it like the final chapter of a DC era they had already emotionally abandoned. It had action, cameos, fan service, jokes, multiverse chaos, and a famous hero at the center. But none of that could hide the deeper problem. Audiences were tired of being told that every messy superhero film was secretly a new beginning. The Flash did not just lose money. It exposed how expensive confusion can become when a studio keeps rebuilding the future before fixing the present.
Number 3. Strange World, 2022. Disney animation rarely walks into theaters quietly, but Strange World almost vanished in plain sight. This was not a tiny experiment, a cheap side project, or a low-risk release. It was a large-scale animated adventure from one of the most powerful family entertainment brands in the world, filled with colorful environments, strange creatures, generational conflict, family tension, and a message about legacy, nature, and responsibility. On paper, it sounded like the kind of imaginative adventure Disney should have been able to sell easily. But the release became a financial nightmare almost immediately. The marketing failed to make the world feel urgent, the characters did not become instantly iconic, and families never treated it like a must-see theatrical event. That last part was deadly. After years of shifting viewing habits, many audiences had become comfortable waiting for Disney animated films to arrive at home, and Strange World suffered badly from that new behavior. It also lacked the usual cultural weapons Disney often uses to dominate conversation. No breakout song, no unforgettable villain, no princess hook, and no instantly marketable emotional moment that children repeated for months. The movie looked expensive, but it did not feel unavoidable. That is the brutal lesson here. A beautiful animated world means nothing if audiences do not feel pulled inside it. Strange World became one of Disney's most painful modern animated flops because it proved that even the studio most associated with family magic could spend massively, open softly, and disappear almost instantly. In Hollywood, silence can be more terrifying than bad reviews. Number 2. John Carter, 2012. Disney did not just lose money on John Carter. It lost control of the story before the movie even had a chance to fight back. This was meant to be the launchpad for a massive sci-fi adventure franchise, the kind of sweeping fantasy empire that could sit beside Star Wars, Avatar, and Pirates of the Caribbean in Disney's kingdom. The source material had deep history, the budget was enormous, and the screen was packed with alien civilizations, desert battles, flying ships, warrior clans, and a human hero thrown into an interplanetary war. But before audiences could fall into that world, the marketing confused them. The title was vague. The trailers looked expensive but strangely unclear. The campaign never explained why this adventure mattered, why John Carter was special, or why viewers had to see it immediately. To casual moviegoers, John Carter sounded less like a blockbuster and more like a random man's name on a poster. That confusion was deadly. The film did earn hundreds of millions worldwide, but not enough to survive its huge production and marketing costs. Disney took a massive write-down, and sequel plans disappeared almost overnight. The irony is that John Carter later found passionate defenders who argued it was more entertaining, imaginative, and unfairly punished than its reputation suggested. But Hollywood does not reward late appreciation. It rewards opening weekends, headlines, investor confidence, and franchise potential. John Carter had worlds, armies, mythology, and ambition.
Yet its biggest battle was never on Mars. It was against a studio campaign that spent a fortune but failed to make audiences care when it mattered most. Opening weekend.
Number 1. The Marvels, 2023.
This was the moment Marvel's golden armor finally showed a very expensive crack. For more than a decade, the Marvel Cinematic Universe looked almost untouchable. Even movies that were not universally loved could still open big because the Marvel logo itself felt like an event. But the Marvels arrived in a colder, more exhausted era. Audiences were dealing with superhero fatigue, streaming overload, multiverse confusion, and the growing sense that every new Marvel project required homework. The movie had cosmic action, colorful visuals, familiar faces, and the support of one of the most powerful entertainment machines in the world. Yet the box office response was shockingly weak for a Marvel title. Instead of feeling like the next essential chapter, it felt to many viewers like optional content inside an overcrowded universe. That perception was brutal. A big budget, global marketing, and franchise branding created enormous pressure. But the worldwide gross came nowhere close to what a Marvel blockbuster was expected to deliver. What made the failure so historic was not simply the reported loss. It was the symbolism. This was not an unknown original film, a risky art house experiment, or a strange, forgotten property. This was Disney, Marvel, superheroes, sequels, crossover storytelling, and studio confidence colliding with audience exhaustion. The Marvels became a box office disaster because it exposed a truth Hollywood had avoided for years. No brand stays bulletproof forever. When viewers stop feeling urgency, even the most powerful franchise can suddenly look ordinary. And for Marvel, that may have been the scariest result of all. The brand was no longer enough.
And that is the brutal lesson behind Hollywood's biggest box office disasters. Money can buy stars, spectacle, and explosions, but it cannot buy urgency. These films did not just flop. They exposed ego, confusion, and audience exhaustion. So which disaster shocked you most, and which one secretly deserved a second chance? Tell us, because Hollywood is still gambling today badly.